Hello and welcome to Israel Palestine, Will It Ever End? My name is Peter Larson, and I'm the chair of a small Ottawa NGO called Canada Talks Israel Palestine. This is the last in a series of 6 lectures given at Carleton University in the spring of 2017 on the complex Israel-Palestine issue. This last lecture is called Solutions, Canadian Policy, and General Conclusions. I will focus on Canadian policy and particularly its adherence to a two-state solution. And we will also pick up various issues that have been addressed during the 6 week of the course. To learn more about Canada Talks Israel Palestine, please go to our website at www.canadatalksisraelpalestine.ca or visit our Facebook page of the same name. If you have any to do that one over again.
Just say, or visit our website again.
Okay. To learn more about Canada Talks Israel Palestine, please go to our website at www.canadatalksisraelpalestine.ca or visit our Facebook page of the same name. If you have any comments about this section or about any of the presentations or questions about Canada Talks Israel Palestine, please write me at chair.ctip@gmail.com. I hope you find this interesting and informative. Have a good day. My provocative title is Nice Words But Bad Policy, Why I Think Canada's Stance on the Israel-Palestine Issue is Misguided and Unhelpful. I'm going to start from, now I know Stéphane Dion is no longer our Foreign Affairs Minister, but the last time we made a comprehensive statement on this issue was about a year ago. And this was announced in the paper as the new Trudeau-Dion Doctrine on Israel-Palestine. It came out on the 24th of January 2016. And it basically boils down to these 5 points. You can read it afterwards. One is that Canada is a steadfast ally and friend of Israel. Secondly, that we strongly support a two-state solution. The third, that we think that the construction of new settlements is unhelpful. This was something that the Harper government hadn't said, and so when this document came out, a lot was made about how Canada is now going to say something about the settlements. We believe the solution needs to be negotiated between Israel and Palestine, and Canada opposes Palestinian recourse to international bodies, including the United Nations. So those are the 5 main points of Canada's policy, which is unchanged, by the way. What I find, first of all, striking about this is that 3 of them are a direct reflection of the AIPAC policy. AIPAC is the largest pro-Israel lobby group in the United States. It's a huge lobby group. And the fact that AIPAC supports direct bilateral negotiations and the involvement of the UN in AIPAC's position is antithetical to peace. So Canada says, for example, that the solution needs to be negotiated directly between Israel and Palestine. My personal view is that this is a travesty. The power differences between the two are so enormous. The analogy I would put to you is it's like looking outside and seeing a man raping a woman, and you say, we're not going to intervene, we just let them work it out. We have one side we have nuclear bombs, helicopter gunships, huge military apparatus. On the Palestinian side, it's basically unarmed people with a little bit of homemade rockets coming from Hamas. And by the way, I don't know if I mentioned this to you, but when I traveled all over Israel, the year after 2014, when quite a bit was made of these Hamas rockets, I did not see one single pothole. No evidence, and I asked, could you show me any evidence of any damage whatsoever done by these Hamas? Now, was that due to the Iron Dome, whatever? I don't know. There were 3 Israelis killed in that when there were over 2,000, 3 Israeli civilians who were killed and over 2,000 Palestinians. So I think that the danger from the Hamas rockets is wildly overestimated based on my travel around Israel from Beersheba all the way up to the north, from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. I didn't see any, and I asked people about it. Some people that I knew were surprised that Canada didn't do more on this issue once Trudeau got in, because Trudeau had a very different discourse around the Israel. Harper was, of course, Israel right or wrong, kind of, it was over the top kind of pro-Israel. And I think my sense is that that was a political calculus. The Conservative Party knew that historically Canadian Jews had been much more aligned with the Liberal Party. Canadian Conservatives had been old-fashioned, kind of like my mother, old-fashioned British, whereas the Liberal Party was the party of refugees and so on and so forth. And this was a conscious attempt by the Conservative Party under Harper to pull those Jewish votes and Jewish money away from the Liberal Party. And also it happened to fit his own very conservative that evangelical Christian kind of base. So it was a good fit for him. The Liberal strategy has been totally different. Is that let's take this off the agenda. So we will go around and give private assurances to Israel. We're on your side, and Trudeau did that. He made a number of speeches to Jewish and Zionist organizations in Canada saying, we're with Israel, don't worry. While at the same time, and also in criticizing, for example, the BDS movement on campus. And I thought one of the most telling examples of this was during their foreign policy debate. So this is now, there's four candidates are there, and Harper is, of course, continuing to try to use Israel as a wedge issue to pull Jewish votes and Jewish money and his own base over into the conservative camp. And so he raised this issue by saying that there's a movement at the United Nations to isolate and denigrate the state of Israel. Mulcair jumps in and takes the bait and says, I don't need to take any lessons from you on Israel. And Trudeau then jumped in immediately. He says, we're all in agreement on this. Let's talk about something else. And that has been the Liberal policy on this. Fundamentally, the Trudeau government's policy on Israel, that 5 points, has been basically the same as the Conservative policy, save for the fact that they say that they don't like the settlements, but they don't do anything about it, but they say they don't like the settlements. When Trudeau got elected, he made mandate letters. This is the mandate letter that went to Dion, but the new one went to Chrystia Freeland, is exactly the same. It listed 14 priorities that are foreign affairs. Mandate letters are letters from the Prime Minister to ministers saying, this is what I want you to do, right? And for the first time in history, they were made public. Right? And so the one to Dion had 14 priorities, what he wants Dion to do. Okay? Changing our policy on Israel Palestine was not one of them. Okay? Now, if you're a smart minister, you say, okay, that means he doesn't want us to change the policy, right? You got 14 things you're supposed to work on, but not in that one. So here's the key points. Now, I want to focus here on this one, which was raised in at a couple of tables. And I want to argue why I think this is not a very wise policy for Canada. But let me say, to start with, I don't care whether the answer is 1 state, 2 states, 3 states. I don't care. I don't care whether Yugoslavia is 1 state or 5. I don't care whether Czechoslovakia is 1 state or 2. It's not our business. I do care about human rights. Okay? And in the same token, I don't think it's up to French people to decide whether Canada should be 1 state or 2. That's up to us to work out our differences. I think France would have every right to criticize Canada if we were expropriating Quebecois land, or if we're expelling people, or we're doing things that are against human rights. But they don't have a word to say, as far as I'm concerned, on whether Quebec should be independent or not. That's not, in my view, appropriate. So I don't have a position on this. I really don't have a position. But we have to look at the history of failed peace processes. There have been peace processes after, like, repeated, where the Peel Commission, this is before the partition, then they had the partition, then they had Camp David Accords, Madrid Conference, Oslo Agreement, so on and so forth. And they've never been able to come to an agreement, right? Or they come to a sort of an agreement, but it doesn't work, right? Now, why is that? Well, here is what are the key elements of what are called the Clinton parameters, or a land for peace. It was negotiated, or came out, Arafat and Ehud Barak came to Washington. They discussed, they weren't able to come to agreement, and Clinton wrote a letter afterwards saying, here's what I think would be grounds for a possible agreement. It had 5 or 6 main points. It was not accepted, but these became generally known as the Clinton parameters, which also were used very, very much a clone to the Arab League proposal as well. So 2 independent states, safe and secure borders based on the 67 armistice lines, with a little bit of land swaps. So remember I showed you the picture of Jerusalem where they built some settlements in Jerusalem. Say, okay, let's doctor the lines a little bit to bring that into Israel. For Israel's security, it gets to maintain military bases in Palestine, the new state of Palestine. But on the contrary, the Palestinian state is non-militarized. So the Palestinian state is not able to have its own army, and they'll have Israeli soldiers in Palestine. East Jerusalem to be the capital of Palestine, so Jerusalem to be divided between the two. And finally, that the refugees have the right to return to Palestine, that is to say, to return to the new state of Palestine, and they may return elsewhere based on host country permission, which means may return to Israel if Israel agrees. Okay, so those are the Clinton parameters. Now, in my view, those can never be accepted by the Palestinian leadership, not even close. And I'll try to explain why very quickly. The notion would be to sort of make this into Palestine, right? There's more or less that. That's this. You see this land progression. Here's the current situation, but sort of bring it back to here somehow with a little bit of adjustment of the borders. So you have to go back to say, you've seen this slide before, where do Jews and Palestinians live today? There are about 6 million Jews. About 5.5 million of them live in, I think those numbers actually, these are probably a couple years old, so probably added 200,000 or sort of the total. About 5.5 million or 6 million live inside Israel, and another little more than 500,000 live in the West Bank. Okay? The Palestinians, and there are about 2.7 live in the West Bank, 1.8 live in Gaza. There are Palestinian refugees all living all around here, and then there is about 1.5 Palestinians living inside Israel. Okay? So they're living all around. Now, okay. So I'll just do a quick review. I told you about living under occupation, what it's like. The refugees, which is now coming up to a 70-year-old problem. There's a map of where the refugees are. This woman looking at my picture of my granddaughter in a refugee camp. That's someone will comment on that one before. That's Syria. Then we saw inside Israel, the Palestinians living in these various towns. I told you a bit about Kufr Qasim, about the border issues and the challenges they have for underfunding. So if you go back to the land for peace parameters, the issue here is if they signed an agreement on this basis, how would it affect the Palestinians? Now, imagine a two-state solution along the Clinton parameters. Just imagine it for a second, okay? Number one, how well would it meet the needs of the 5 million refugees? This is what's being offered to them, to return to the West Bank, which is, as someone's mentioned before, very stressed. It's a desert, basically, a desert. So there's been suggested under the Clinton parameters that all the Palestinian refugees and so on all move to here, which is a desert. Is that going to work? I don't think so. So what's going to happen? They're going to say no. And then other countries, for their various reasons, whether it's Iran or Turkey or whatever, are going to say, we'll help you. For their own geostrategic, these people are going to be looking for help. They're going to say, this deal, even though the deal's been signed, doesn't meet our needs. That's first issue. Second issue, how does such a deal, a two-state solution, affect the Palestinian citizens of Israel? Is that going to make their lives better? Does that make them equal citizens? Does that improve their education, their housing, their employment? Or, given the fact that a majority of Israelis already think that Arabs should all be sent out of Israel, are there going to be intensified pressures to push them out too? More ethnic cleansing. Because you say, now you've got a country, we just signed a deal, go there. These people are not involved in that negotiation. That negotiation is with Fatah, with the Palestinian Authority that looks after the West Bank, but those people are not represented there. What about the 1.8 million people who live in Gaza? Okay, so there's people living here in Gaza. Now, the people in Gaza, 1.2 million of them are refugees. That is to say, they don't come from Gaza. And I have been in Gaza. You can climb up to the 4th story of an apartment building here and look out over the wall, and you can see your father's land being worked by immigrant Jews from somewhere else. Now, under a two-state solution, the wall's still there. The immigrants are still farming your father's land, and you're still a refugee. Like they call it an independent country, but you're still there. It hasn't changed anything. Are they going to be happy? Last group, the 2.5 million Palestinians in the West Bank. The West Bank is very stressed. A lot of the water has been siphoned off in the national aquifer. It's landlocked. It's dependent on Israel, not allowed to have a military. The first thing they're going to be doing is looking for allies, because every country negotiates with its neighbors and needs help in doing it. They're very weak. So my conclusion on this is that the two-state solution sounds fair. It just, to a Canadian, it just sounds fair. But I think that even if they sign a two-state solution, it's not going to solve the problem. I think that instead of having this two-state mantra, that we've got to have the two-state mantra, the two-state, the two-state, the two-state, we have to turn it around. And I think we've got to say, given the fact that the Palestinian groups have legitimate grievances, how are we going to find a path to addressing them while preserving the safety and security of Jews, which I think is also an important issue. And here's my reworking of what I think Canadian policy should be. Neither Mr. Dion nor Mrs. Freeland have been very enthusiastic about taking up my suggestions, but here it is. First of all, I think instead of saying we're a steadfast ally and friend of Israel, I should say we're a friend of the Israelis and the Palestinians. Like we want to help here. We want to help here. Secondly, I think we should say we'll support any solution that ensures human rights for both groups of people. This one here, we say that we can oppose, actually, we didn't say we oppose, we find unhelpful the construction of new settlements. The United Nations has just said all those constructions, whether new or not, are illegal. So why doesn't Canada say we think they're illegal? Well, we don't. We say we think new ones are unhelpful. I don't agree that the solution should be negotiated. In the end, it has to be negotiated, of course, between the two people. But right now, there's such a preponderance of force on one side. I think that we need to be involved, and we have to encourage Palestinian participation in the UN, rather than saying we oppose Palestinian participation in the UN. So what's the possible way forward? Well, I think it's got to be somehow around truth and reconciliation. There has to be a recognition that what happened wasn't fair. Some people say this issue is very, very complicated, and I say it's simple and complicated. It's simple in the sense that it's clear what happened. Very clear what happened. What's complicated is what to do about it now. And that way, it's a bit like the Aboriginal issue, right? It was very clear we had the power to take their land, and we did. And then a number of very unfair, unfortunate things happened. What are we going to do about it now? That's the way I think we have to look at this. So that's my presentation. It's time for the break, and then we can have questions and discussion afterwards. Okay? Thank you.